into a retrospective on yesterday, and to talk a little bit about what we saw in the course of the day. So yesterday morning, we hit on a very important topic, one that's quite central to our research program, and one that's quite central to the conception of this boot camp, which is this notion of hybrid modeling. And I showed you what I consider 5 compelling patterns for use of hybrid modeling in the health arena. To wit, cases where we will repair agent-based modeling and discrete event modeling for the sake of capturing catchment populations and their service facilities that service them. Very, very powerful notion there. We have a discrete event model capturing the dynamics of resource-constrained service facilities to which people from the general population present. And far from being solitudes, or far from being only a one-way exchange with one downstream of the other, it's a two-way thing. So the people present for care at certain points in their health trajectories, and in turn, their health status is influenced by what goes on in the facility. Now, this is may seem of modest import on the face of it, but it's actually fairly profound, because it allows us to ask about the ways that not only change in population health shape service delivery, shape the needs expressed in terms of our clinical encounters, et cetera. But that's a fundamental interest in the stage of the graying population in many countries. But it also allows us to understand the ways in which efficiencies, processes in place, like, as you heard Kurt discuss, sort of risk-conscious counseling within the context of a care facility might confer benefits to population health. Okay? So the issue here is one with strong implications. And you may recall, if we hark back to Kurt's talk on Tuesday, one of the things that came up in a back and forth discussion, which I said was a big area of my interest, or one of these integrated models, was the way in which clinical care pathway innovations end up affecting population health in the large, given systems effects. And the idea was that if you had this clinic and individuals in the clinic were engaged now in risk-based counseling to not only do drill and fill with respect to dental care, but to actually catalyze behavior change, perhaps healthier eating habits and nutrition habits, so less sugar-sweetened beverages, for example, or better brushing and flossing habits, et cetera. How would that end up affecting not only the population health, but the sustainability of the clinic? And the insight being here that in the short term, it's going to take more time per patient, but in the medium term, it's going to ripple through to healthier patients who have less serious needs and whose needs can be addressed more quickly with less resources. So on the one hand, it may seem to increase resource demand, on the other hand, to lessen it in the medium and long term for the benefit of the population health as well. So that's an example of those interactions. Another case we saw was a case where we have upstream coarse-grained population, downstream individuals represented in the agent-based model. The upstream population using aggregate system dynamics model, the downstream individual-based modeling, whether discrete event or agent-based or both. Once again, a very powerful notion that lends an economy of representation and allows us to focus our research efforts. We also saw a pattern where we have agent continuous dynamics characterized using stocks and flows. Another case yet where we had aggregate dynamics characterized with stocks and flows affecting individual agents. And yet another case where we had individual agents whose behaviors were summarized in stocks and flows at the aggregate level, okay? Or whose characteristics, for example, cost effectiveness. Okay, so those were 5 powerful forms of hybrid modeling, but they're not the only forms, ladies and gentlemen. And in fact, if you go to a book which was known as the Big Book of AnyLogic, I think it's the Big Book of Simulation now, is that right? Yeah. And it's a big book. Lots of good stuff in there, including, incidentally, some coverage of kind of Java for AnyLogic, which provides a lot of basics. But beyond that, there's also a treatment of this issue of hybrid modeling, which more systematically expounds, although not most emphatically not for health, the ways in which the different types of modeling supported by AnyLogic can cross with each other. For example, there are cases where system dynamics might be paired with discrete event modeling without using agent-based modeling, etc. And there's actually a sort of a matrix in there to look at different combinations of possibilities. So that might be of interest to people with the proviso that book was written for AnyLogic 6, and therefore is some of the contents could use some updates. A couple other things. These techniques are largely painless in AnyLogic. I walked you through a set of examples yesterday, which I asked you to run, and you may have thought that there was a lot of finesse behind them. But in fact, putting together hybrid models is in fact very simple. And if there were a lot of demand today, if there was a lot of interest in a hybrid model, we could go over to S311 in a parallel session, and we could build 1 or 2 of those hybrid models within the scope of an hour and a half or so, and you'd see how seamless it is. There's not a lot of magic there. There used to be. Time was there was some doing that you had to do in order to realize it smoothly. But these days, it's a very straightforward thing. Almost you can be excused for not knowing you're doing hybrid modeling because there's no real there's very little in the way of direct barriers. But there are other barriers, ladies and gentlemen, and a key one concerns adverse performance when you're combining system dynamics with an agent-based model. And as we are wont, our group has looked into details of the code base to investigate why this is, and it's a fairly fundamental thing in the way that AnyLogic currently works. It is something which could be changed, and we have a suggestion on how it could be changed without a lot of problems to lessen the gravity of this. But what it really comes down to is when you have agents who contain stocks and flows, you're going to be maxing out your performance on the order of a couple thousand agents typically. You're not going to be able to scale to the sorts of models Winchell and Wade and others build for 750,000 agents for the Saskatchewan population or what have you. So when we're dealing with system dynamics in particular, together with agent-based modeling, we are dealing with some pretty stiff performance penalties, and there's ways you can lessen it. If you go into it in a naive way, you can get much more adverse performance. Yeah, you can tune it to a degree, but really it's something that AnyLogic needs to invest in to make it scalable to the hundreds of thousands of agent run. Yes, Scott?
One way you can do it is if you're using more or less piecewise linear.
Yeah, and that's what Wade does, right?
Well,
yeah,
you can do it
approximation
directly, but one way to make it a lot easier is actually the fluid library.
Oh, that's interesting. Fluid library.
So, because that's very quick to execute, especially compared to system dynamics.
Okay.
And so that's another way you can do it, and probably almost eliminate the scaling issue.
That's great. Maybe you could talk with Wade a little bit about that. Sure. And I mean, we've basically used simple numeric approximations that are have some simple theoretical basis for them, in the sense that Euler integration type stuff. I mean, it's very straightforward with coarse time steps, but that's an interesting idea. It is one that unfortunately requires some conscious thinking if you're trying to scale it at a large scale level. Kurt, you didn't have your hand up. No. Okay.
No.
Okay.
I may have finished adjusting my shirt.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay. So hybrid modeling was of significance, and then yesterday over lunch, we heard about a very active project that very much is enmeshed in the kind of the human theater of modeling. This is a project in which Kurt offered a seminal early contribution that raised the confidence. This was a direction our Ministry of Health wanted to take in a big way, and it gives me no shortage of pleasure to say my student Yuan Tian has advanced that greatly, and it's also with great pleasure I announce that Yuan is going to be a PhD student here starting next week, and finishing up her PhD whilst working for the Ministry of Health project. This is going places, and I hope what that helped highlight, though, is something about the very real set of considerations that go on when you're taking a modeling initiative and you're trying to translate it into in a context where modeling is new to people and so on, where the team is not familiar with where modeling fits in. There's been a lot of back and forth with that team and some growing pains. Growing pains associated with a shift from situations where the analytics going on were almost entirely statistically driven, where data privacy concerns associated with small numbers for statistical models were foremost, and where there were very tight restrictions on the ways in which models might be associated with data and then brought outside a secure area, to a situation where we have models which are widely instantiated with data, but where it doesn't really make sense to talk about about small numbers in a traditional sense, or where the number of data items is so huge that we're not talking about something where just a few data items could give away the shop privacy-wise in terms of health trajectories of individuals or what have you. So there's some back and forth there on sort of privacy, normal privacy concerns, how they translate to simulation models, back and forth about how simulation models translate or can be used together with or help sharpen the insights from or complement and provide initial insights beyond lean techniques, lean in health, etc., and ways in which they might inform broader priority setting on a cross-functional basis. So that's exciting stuff, and I'm very, very pleased and honored to be part of that. So those were most of the things we saw in the morning and lunch. In the afternoon, we did have a session in this room which looked at input and output from models, and we saw that AnyLogic databases provide a powerful way of both bringing data into the model. You can import them from databases, from Excel sheets. You can enter things manually if you wish to do so, as we did yesterday, and you can use it to kind of instantiate or parameterize whole areas of a model. More than that, you can use them as powerful output vehicles by having data put into the database that we export subsequently to an Excel sheet, for example. I also noted that there's more manual mechanisms, and I didn't really emphasize as much as I should have, but if we were to go, for example, look at at a given model. For example, this one that we built yesterday, we drew in some elements of it from the associated with this database down here, this database down at the bottom. You'll recall us sort of frobbing these things, and you noted we could import tables, etc., and export them, etc. But then I also noted that in the palette, there's this thing called a connectivity. Oh, sorry. First things first. We also noted within the model that in the analysis, it is in the connectivity palette. There's things for Excel files, text files, databases, and supports for databases. Okay. Now, be aware that these ones here are for professional versions of AnyLogic. If you don't have a professional, we have mechanisms that can allow you to use databases without much trouble. It's not a big deal, in short, without it. In fact, UN yesterday created our first generation elements, and it's not a big thing. It's just you put in a file into your project, and then you can use it to query the database, for example. You could still use this database object, I thought. Okay, then we did it without this database object. We did, however, use Excel files and text files. In the project yesterday, I think I alluded to how Excel files could be used, and actually dragged one in so we could see it. These are powerful mechanisms, and database access without the professional edition is readily possible. And I'd be glad to share code with you on that front. Okay. Okay. So that was some yesterday. I also noted how we could use this Excel file here to import parameter settings from Excel files. We can also write data sets and to particular cells of Excel files. That's very straightforward to do, but it is a somewhat manual process, one that someone close to me would probably call brutal sometimes, because you can write one cell at a time. Okay, one cell at a time for some things, unless you're exporting bulk thing like a data set. So the advent of the database has spared us a lot of trouble, and I think kudos to AnyLogic for their investment in that. We saw the database could provide formidable support for debugging too, by allowing us to trace what's going on in a model and securing clarity associated with that. Okay, great. So that was yesterday, input, output, databases used for input and output, and other things as well, and other mechanisms as well. Okay, very good. So that was a bit of a retrospective. What do we have in store today? Well, I mentioned it earlier, and we will shape, per people's interest, whether we roll out some additional items in the course of the day. Okay, here we go.